Do you ever have that feeling where you just want to take off your shirt, put on your mask, and start wrestling people? No? Just me? Well, I played a game this past week where you don't get that choice. Drinkbox Studios from Toronto has created an action-packed game in their luchador simulator, Guacamelee. Well, it isn't so much of a luchador simulator as more of a 2D platforming brawler with style oozing from every orifice. Guacamelee is set between the worlds of the living and the dead. Inspired by Mexican folklore, players take control of a down-on-his-luck wrestler named Juan Aguacate as he fights through hordes of undead enemies to stop the evil Carlos Calaca from gaining ultimate power by sacrificing the beautiful El Presidente's daughter. Set in and around a small village in Mexico, Guacamelee has players punch, suplex, pile drive their enemies into a pulp while traveling through altered dimensions. Guacamelee expands upon many classic games by blurring the boundaries between combat and platforming, making many of the moves necessary to use for both of these. So let's snap this bad boy in two and see what our first game is in the breakdown. You could say that Guacamelee plays homage to many other games, referencing every game it can in the environment, dialogue, all little winks and nods to games that came before it. Drinkbox actually describes Guacamelee as a Metroid-style game. It even features Chozo statues to unlock your powers. I'm not going to talk about Metroid, that would be too easy, for two reasons. One, because I already talked about it last week with Dark Souls, and two, there is another perfectly viable title to use for the breakdown, and that is Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Ah yes, the other half of Metroidvania. Symphony of the Night is one of the most iconic games in the industry, that it even gets its own genre. In terms of gameplay, it shares exactly what you would expect with Guacamelee. The 2D world is entirely open-ended and chock full of secrets and areas that are inaccessible until you have the proper abilities and equipment. In this case, Juan inherits fighting moves from a mystical goat that benefit him both in battle and exploration. Who doesn't want to use a rooster uppercut or a toad splash to open a doorway, as well as crack open an enemy's skull? It's funny that in Symphony of the Night, all your abilities turn you into animals as well, so you can see where I'm drawing these parallels. Oh, and you can turn Juan into a chicken once you have unlocked Pollo Power! The combat in Symphony of the Night was fairly deep for this type of game, as you had to decide on what weapon to use in combination with your items and abilities. Guacamelee follows suit and gradually builds up your arsenal of wrestling moves throughout the game. The initially bland set of punches and kicks that you start out with eventually give way to more specialized moves like ground pounds and throws. These can be mixed together for some impressively complex combos. Taking things one step further, Guacamelee throws in enemies that can only be defeated with a certain color-coded attack, making for some interesting brawls. Symphony of the Night carried role-playing elements where you could improve Alucard's abilities by leveling up. This remains in Guacamelee with three main currencies that are used to expand your powers. Coins allow you to buy new skills, hearts boost your maximum health, and gold expands your stamina meter, allowing you to do more special moves. These are the primary rewards for exploration, and the game world is filled with hidden treasure chests in what regularly seem to be impossible to reach areas. If you're like me, you're going to spend as much time exploring as you are completing the main game. Thankfully, the platforming is difficult yet rewarding, and the combat is just complex enough that it doesn't get tedious. If you like the Metroidvania style of games with gear gating and the exploration, with a dose of character growth, then you're going to be right at home, in the ring, with Guacamelee. Now let's take a break and look at the flip side of Guacamelee and see what other game it breaks down into. It's really important to me that I mention how much I love luchadors. It is honestly what drew me towards Guacamelee when I first saw it at PAX last year. The game is based in Mexican folklore and dripping with style that I couldn't help break it down into grim fandango. You've probably heard many people reference Grim Fandango as one of the most stylish, well-written, and swan songs of the adventure genre, and I agree with all of that. What sets Grim Fandango apart from all the other great adventure games is that, it took its setting to somewhere different and embraced it wholeheartedly. Grim Fandango's world is set in the land of the dead, with all of the characters in the game represented as Calaca-like figures. The villain in Guacamelee is named Carlos Calaca, so you can see where I'm going with this. Both games give you the opportunity to travel between the living world and the dead world, all while trying to solve puzzles using the elements between them. Where Manny Calvera is solving more mind-based puzzles, Juan's ability to hop between the worlds sets up a range of platforming puzzles where, you must quickly switch between the two in order to create platforms to jump on, or columns to leap between. This quickly becomes second nature, and the battles between enemies that keep jumping between each world are particularly satisfying. Oddly though, the whole twin world concept is largely ignored for the first half of the game, and by consequence seems strangely underutilized by the end, until you find the more difficult platforming puzzles. Grim Fandango was actually the first adventure game to use the 3D computer graphics, a pioneer of its time, if you will. Guacamelee uses gorgeous artwork, animation, and sound to provide so much character to the game that you can't take your eyes off of it. The visuals are clearly influenced by traditional Mexican art, but the bold, angular style still has a personality of its own. I remember being awestruck by the visuals in Grim Fandango, and the same happened with Guacamelee. I may just have a soft spot for the bright and bold Mexican style. The writing is what carried Grim Fandango, and I would say that it holds the same, it doesn't really hold the same weight in Guacamelee. I would be doing it a disservice if I didn't mention it, that although it has a goofy story, the dialogue throughout the game is pretty witty, and sometimes a little too witty for its own good. Alright, Grim Fandango is the second game that I think Guacamelee breaks down into. Let's finish things up and wrap up the show with the summary. So there you have it, the breakdown for Guacamelee, a Metroidvania-style action platformer that holds many similarities of its predecessor, Symphony of the Night, and Metroid before that. The combat, the character progression, and the gear gating mashing so well together in a modern take on the genre. Then you have Grim Fandango, the stylized adventure game set in the land of the dead, drawing influence from that Mexican culture, and remains to this day one of the most well-written games. Guacamelee gets the best of both worlds coming together as a stylish, solid experience. It's one of the greatest games I've played this year, and when you purchase it on PSN, you can play it on either your PS3 or Vita. This comes in handy when you want to try the co-op mode where you can play through the whole game with a friend. Guacamelee may not have the same impact to have a whole genre named after it, but it does a great job of using the best parts of these types of games and adds its own flavor that tightens the package together as a whole. Plus, luchadors. It doesn't get much better than that. So thanks so much for coming with me on this journey to the land of the dead and breaking down Guacamelee. If you like the show, toss a comment in and let me know what your breakdown of Guacamelee would be. Subscribe, do all that good stuff, and we will hopefully see you next week for another breakdown. Once again, my name is Locke Vincent, and thank you so much for joining me on this epic journey. We'll see you all next week. Now get out there and do your best frog splash into the ring, go to the top of the mountain, get her done. See you later.